So please join us in a spirit of meditation and prayer as we deepen into our service and share our opening words for this morning. It is not by chance that you arrived here today. You have been looking for something larger than yourself. Inside of you, there is a yearning, a calling, a hope for more, a desire for a place of belonging and caring. Through your struggles, someone nurtured you into being, instilling a belief in a shared purpose, a common yet precious resource that belongs to all of us when we share. And so you began seeking a beloved community, a people that does not put fences around love, a community that holds its arms open to possibilities of love, a heart home to nourish your soul and share your gifts. Welcome home. Welcome to worship. I would love to have, where did she go? Gretchen, come forward to light the chalice, which is a symbol of the spark of life in each of us. Today's chalice lighting words were co-written by Unitarian Universalist participants at the Latin American Encounter in Colombia, whose names you can find in your order of service. Again, I invite you into a spirit of meditation and prayer. We light this chalice to motivate us to do something no matter how small or simple. We light this chalice for the joy and health that we have in our lives, for the hope in the future, and in gratitude for those who were present at this Latin American gathering. We light this chalice for those who are searching for a new home. We light this chalice for all living beings dwelling this land, for those who are coming and for those who were. We light this chalice to all existent beings in this universe that are seeking meaning in community and freedom. We light this chalice for a present without unjust structures and relationships. We light this chalice for separated families, for distant friends. We light this chalice to enlighten their paths of reunion, to honor the virtuous traditions of our ancestors, recent and remote, to extend the boundaries of community beyond our own physical, mental, and spiritual borders, and to leave a legacy of peace, justice, and commitment for future generations of Mother Earth. We light this chalice for all the world to see. These words were written by Side with Love campaign senior strategist, Reverend Elizabeth Nguyen, just this past weekend. Instructions for when your government betrays you again. Remember that governments betray, and many have gone before us who know how this goes. Listen to them. Remember that we can't heal white supremacy or white Christian nationalism today or tomorrow. But we can touch some healing, some justice every day, every moment. Raise money for a bond or a bail. Go with someone to court. Tell the truth about your family and how they migrated or were forced to or did not. Remember that we answer to the laws of love and justice. We work for our ancestors and our children's children. There is no higher accountability. Remember that everyone who found their power and freed themselves or their kindred also faced powerlessness, despair, overwhelm, tear gas, or their century's version of it. Remember that everyone who has ever defected from fascism or resigned from state violence or put their body on the line for family or opened their home has doubted, wrestled, given up, tried again, and found a way to love through it. And so now we get ready for our program today, Crisis at the Borders on Being Human. And I get to introduce my dear friend who so many of us gain so much from being in community with, our Reverend Karen Van Fossan.
The first time I met my randomly selected roommate at my new college, my heart flew in her direction. Not because we shared the same basic gender, ethnicity, birth year, and other demographics, though we did, but because she talked just like my grandma and grandpa Van. The first question I ever asked her in my life was, "Are you from Decatur?" Decatur, Illinois, I meant. She said no. I was shocked. She completely had that Decatur accent, a touch of Southern, a way of spinning the vowels around, a sparkle in the cadence like a joke lay in wait between every syllable. But she wasn't from Decatur. I'm from Mount Zion, she said, just outside Decatur. Aha! She wasn't exactly my grandma and grandpa, but every time she spoke, she brought me some of their comfort. I could hang around and listen to her talk about just about anything, just to hang around and listen to her talk about just about anything. Until she got really, really, really mad at me round about mid-semester. So mad that she drew a line down the middle of our slender room, and I was no longer allowed, according to her rules, to cross onto her side. Well, she had to make an exception every day because just to enter the room was to trespass into her territory since the door opened immediately onto her side of the room. But as long as I was fleet of foot, that momentary trespass was totally permitted. Of course, even worse than the difficult task of keeping my body from breathing half of the air in the room was the fact that I missed all those conversations we used to have. So, I had options. I could build up a force of allies to do social battle against her all over campus. That was one option. I could acquiesce to her every demand. That was another. I could do what I would say our current president does today, which is identify her true need, which was for space, and apply false blame about who was responsible for that need remaining unmet, like maybe the international students. Or I could take down the wall around my own heart and listen. It turned out she didn't like it when I let my friends use her desk to study when I had them over. Even more, she didn't like it that these were sometimes her friends who were coming over to visit me. Could she trust me not to take what was hers without building a wall to protect it? And bigger question, what was hers? So I'm going to come back to the answers that we figured out together, and we did, and spoiler alert, we figured it out. I'm going to come back to that. But first I want to get to these broiling conflicts and questions at our own US-Mexico border conflict. So here's a little background as I understand it. This is the news as I know it from about yesterday afternoon. If anyone's got newer news, please signal and we'll add that in right now. So as I understand it, roughly 17,000 migrants, mostly from Honduras, have been traveling mostly by foot in a number of caravans across Central America, into Mexico, and many hope eventually into the US. The migrants, women, children, and men, are leaving because of gang violence, corruption, and severe economic hardship, particularly in Honduras. They are traveling together because of the old adage, safety in numbers. Many are staying in temporary shelters in Mexico. Some are being met by UUs and other people of faith and conscience right there at the US-Mexico border. Too many are being tear-gassed by our military, and so far a 16-year-old boy has been killed by that same military. I stand corrected, the 16-year-old young person who was killed by US Border Patrol. Yesterday's news was full of reports about a convicted murderer and also a gang member who had slipped into the caravan in the hope of crossing into the US. While murder and extortion should never be claimed as values, 1 or 2 in 17,000 in no way matches the president's rhetoric about gangs of murderers and rapists and so on. And I'm going to boldly say that if we had a chance to hear the stories of that 1 or 2, I can't say what we would learn. Many people in our country and around the world wonder how migrants in a caravan or caravans can sustain the hope that the U.S., under its current leadership, will give a damn. Jose Aguilar, a migrant from Honduras, has famously been quoted as saying, essentially, God will touch the heart of Donald Trump. God will touch the heart of Donald Trump. I know some people in this beloved congregation don't actually believe in either concept, God or Donald Trump. But let me say this. One thing we can believe in is this beloved congregation. So those of us who do believe in God or the higher power of our understanding, as it is sometimes said, tend to believe this higher power animates our congregation's best work for justice. Those of us who believe it's up to us human beings, period, tend to believe that the beloved community itself animates our best work for justice. Either way, we are called, whether by God or our neighbors to the south, or our own longing just to be human beings, to do, once again, our best work for justice. Some of our sister congregations are sponsoring immigrants and refugees to relocate to their areas all over the map. Some are signing up as sanctuary congregations, becoming places where migrant families literally live, protected within the walls of the church from arrest and deportation. So you may be thinking, come on. This is the first year, 2018, when our congregation's membership has reached over 100. That deserves a little celebration. But even that, you might be thinking, how are we going to provide sanctuary for 17,000 people? Keep in mind, the Life Church of Edmond, Oklahoma has an average weekly attendance of, get this, 53,000. So, who's to say we can't have a UU mega church? But that's not the point. Of course, that's not the point. The point is, in a way, that 17,000 people is not really that many people compared to the size of the whole US or North Dakota or even a mega church. I'm suggesting that the crisis has more to do with the governments and their business associates at either end of the caravan than with the migrants themselves or even their numbers. As curious as I am, and I am curious, about why the migrants are caravanning, I'm even more curious about why it's so hard for their home countries to keep them safe, and even more, for our country to accept them. Seriously. I've never been to Honduras. I confess I would like to go someday, I think. But since I've lived here in the US my entire life, I'm going to focus here on this end of the caravan. What is up? Why is this country ruled, not completely composed of, but ruled mostly by immigrants and their descendants, so inhospitable to those in the same, sometimes literal boat? Have you ever had two friends? You adore them both, but they can't stand each other or trust each other, and they just don't like to be in the same place. It's like years ago, a person named Randy Van Fossan tried to friend request me on social media. I told my dad, also named Randy Van Fossan, that somebody else named Randy Van Fossan wanted to be my friend. I don't think you should, he said. There's just something I don't trust about that guy. Yeah. I'll tell you between the services if I accepted or I didn't accept, if I did what my dad said or not. But that's another sermon for another time. And he wants to be here for it. Anyway, it can be hard to like people who have the same vulnerabilities we do because they remind us of those same vulnerabilities. Being scared, being hungry, being under the thumb of something or someone more dangerous or more powerful. That's how my ancestors arrived on this land. Until I face that, until I acknowledge the traumas of my ancestors, I'm going to be no good in preventing my government or my leaders or myself from perpetrating those same traumas on identified others. I'll never forget one of the opening lines in a PBS documentary about European colonization of this land. A native speaker refers to European colonists when he says, "What had been done to them, they did to us better." I'm going to read you a portion of a list of tribal nations whose cultures no longer exist. Marsians, Gambrians, Vandalians, Tungrians, Araviscans, Ossians, Treverians, Nervians, Vangiones, Tribotians, Nemetes, Eubians, Madiatians, Catans, Eusipians, Tencturians, Bructurians, Chamavians, Angravarians, Bructerians, Duglabinians, Chaswarians, Frisians, Chaucians, Phocians, Cheruscans, Cimbrians, Suevians, and so on. These tribal nations are not from this continent or the continent to the south of us. These tribal nations were colonized on the continent where most people in Bismarck, Mandan came from, a place we now call Europe. As white people, we've been there, done that. Been there, experienced that. Anyone who's ever had depression or panic attacks or a really bad stomach flu knows how much we don't want to go back to where we've been before. We want to move on. We want to get away from that. It's natural enough. It's human enough. But at some time, we've really got to face it. By we, I mean white people like myself, or any other people who would like to be identified who find themselves defined by a colonial paradigm. A paradigm that says this: there's not enough. To get any, we've got to take it. To keep any, we've got to kill for it or allow others to be killed on our behalf. It's a self-fulfilling paradigm because taking never fills us up and killing only makes us afraid of a world in which so much killing can happen. And enough is never enough. People from Honduras are coming here because they can see that we have so much. But our president thinks we have nothing, or at least not enough. And the more we hoard, the more we keep for ourselves, the less there really is to go around. When someone has 9 homes, it's harder for someone else to have 1. When someone has millions of dollars, it's hard for someone else to have 10. A study a few years ago found that people in the US tend to believe we'll be happy when we just jump to that next income bracket, whatever bracket we're currently in. If we define our well-being by how much money we have, we never have quite enough of either. Paradigm self-fulfilled. Many of us grew up with the parable of the loaves and the fishes. In that parable, thousands of people gathered to listen to the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, teachings about generosity and hope. And all had plenty to eat with just a handful of loaves and fishes. Because when we live by the teachings of generosity and hope, we actually do have enough. We have enough because we have enough. We is no longer me versus you, it's us. I learned this lesson, lived this teaching most poignantly at Ocheti Shakowin Camp just north of Standing Rock, where we locals have recently woken up to our own border crisis. A friend of mine from Standing Rock refers to the reservation as a POW camp, a prisoner of war camp. According to treaty, Standing Rock is a sovereign nation with real borders. According to practice by our government and the corporations that collude with it, Standing Rock is a decreasing parcel of land for people who dare and dared to resist colonialism and the paradigm of scarcity it manifests. When we are all of us, like at Ocheti Shakowin Camp, where there was always enough to eat, always room for one more, always a shared prayer space, we put the lie to the worldview that we only have enough by taking more than enough from another. 17,000 people. Considering the long-time out-migration from North Dakota, 17,000 new North Dakotans would help us start to keep up. At its height, there were just about that many people at Ocheti Shakowin Camp, not a very large piece of the earth. We can take hope in the current border crisis. This crisis of desperately poor people being rejected at the US border by order of desperately rich people. We can take hope in this situation if we give us hope. How we act in the world tells us what the world is like, or could be. When we are generous, we live in a generous world. When we are hopeful, we live in a hopeful world. When we side with the vulnerable, we live in a world in which we too can be vulnerable and survive. So speaking of vulnerability, I'm going to circle back to those days when I was banned from one half of the dorm room by a person to whom my heart had flown the first time I heard her speak. When we finally decided to reach across our border, our invisible wall, we were able to make agreements about how we would coexist, what we would share, and what not. Our desks? No. Our friends? Well, yes. Someone recently told me in poignant clarity, I'm not so inclined to despair these days because I'm spending so much more time with people who stay in the struggle, and that gives them hope. You know who you are. That someone is a congregant, and those people that congregant was referring to are us. Every paradigm is largely self-fulfilling. In the face of this border crisis, what do we wish ours to be?
Help us to be the always helpful gardeners of the Spirit, who know that without darkness, nothing comes to birth, as without light, nothing flowers.